I'm in conversation with the Deputy Finance Minister, Dr. David Masondo. Thank you very much, Mr. Masondo, for joining us. So last week at the RMB Investor Conference, you gave a little hint around your levels of confidence, saying that you felt that the budget that would be delivered today would be sufficient for us not to see another iteration of budget. That is, there won't be a budget 4.0. What has given you that confidence, given the budget that's been tabled today?
Thanks, Nombu, for having me. My confidence comes from the fact that there's been extensive consultations between political parties and within the government itself. There's wide consensus on the budget that would be today as National Treasury. So I'm very confident that we're not going to have another budget. We agree on the measures that we've undertaken to raise revenue. We agree insofar as the areas that we need to spend on and how we should best grow the economy.
Now the finance minister talked about the 1 trillion or over 1 trillion rand that's set to be spent on infrastructure over the medium term. This is a massive amount of money. How do we ensure that the checks and balances are in place so that that money is actually used for great effect to boost the economic growth story of South Africa?
Definitely, we need to make sure that the people who are in the positions to execute infrastructure rollout in this country, they are the right people who are in the right position. But this parliament has a responsibility to continuously ask questions on how this 1 trillion rand that is going to be spent on infrastructure over the next 3 years is spent properly and according to the laws of this country. In addition to the 1 trillion that government will be spending on, we've also created the condition for the private sector to spend their own money in infrastructure, freight rail infrastructure, water infrastructure, as well as energy. And we've set those conditions to enable the private sector to participate and put their money in the infrastructure. And one of the ways through which we seek to get the private sector to participate in infrastructure rollout in this country, we're going to be raising for the first time an infrastructure bond with money that we're going to borrow in order to finance infrastructure, because the question about raising debt is not an issue. The question is, what are you using that money for, and whether your economy will be able to service that debt. So raising money specifically to finance infrastructure is important for jobs, it's important for economic growth.
Deputy Minister, thank you so much for your time. All right, let me hand it over now to Samkele Maseko.
The ATM has been one of the political parties that has been very vociferous in saying that a budget tabled by the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, is not addressing the needs of the people, particularly on the issue of the then proposed increase of value-added tax. I would assume that Mr. Vuyazungula would have an issue, particularly when it comes to the removal of the zeros-rated basket, particularly this time around in this particular budget. What are some of the areas that you are not happy about and happy about with this budget presented by the Minister?
The increase in the fuel levy, for us, we see it as another way to make South Africans more poorer, because an increase in fuel levy means it's going to be an increase in the cost of living, and in the increase of cost of living is going to make South Africans to be more stretched financially. Also, the question of not being able to thoroughly deal with the issue of illicit financial flows. Yes, the issue of illicit trade in tobacco is one of the aspects. However, bulk of the illicit financial flows happen in the mining industry, and that is whereby if the minister was very stringent on the mining industry, the revenue that is needed to fund state projects would have been gotten easily in the mining sector. And then the last issue, it is the issue that the minister does state that 1.2 billion rands per day is being spent to service debt. However, there seems to be no appetite, no real plan. Hence, you find that the debt to GDP ratio has increased by 1%. So we are going to live in a country whereby the GDP is equal to debt, or debt is equal to GDP, or even higher in the next coming years. So our view as the ATM is that people must not be happy because that the budget was not in It was the one tabled in March was reversed. Now, because we suddenly have a budget, we must be happy. We must scrutinize the aspects of the budget that has been tabled today, whether it is in the best interest of the people. And the answer from our side is that the budget tabled today does nothing to fundamentally improve the lives of our citizens.
When you look at the capacitation of the South African Revenue Services, are you particularly happy with that particular point that has been raised by the minister, noting that SARS needs those much resources in order to collect those funds in order for government to have an additional revenue?
The 7.5 billion is a very tiny fraction compared to what SARS really needs, because there is a strong view that SARS needs a very high amount that will be able to go after all of the people that are not paying their taxes, particularly multinational companies who operate in South Africa but commit profit shifting, which reduces the amount of revenue that could be collected in South Africa. So whilst we welcome the 7.5 billion, we do have a view that it is not enough to substantially reduce the amount of illicit financial flows that have been committed by these multinational companies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zungula. I'm also with my colleague Bulelani Phillips, who is alongside the Freedom Front Plus. I am throwing over to you now, Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Samkele. Of course, we're going to talk to the spokesperson of finance of the Freedom Front Plus, Voter Vessels. Firstly, the minister outlining a budget shortfall. Surely next year he's talking about exploring other tax proposals. How do we move from there?
Well, we have to face the reality that our gross need for debt is increasing. It's almost at 600 billion rand. The budget deficit is more than 360 billion rand. So the reality is that we can't continue on this track. I think this budget is better. It's better than the first proposals because it is expansive, but it does focus on cost containment, and not cost containment in terms of service delivery or infrastructure spending, but saying we need to get more value for money. We believe that if the necessary steps are taken to really go and look where there's unnecessary expenditure, waste, where government is paying more for something than that is market related, where government is being exploited, and that is stopped, it won't be necessary next year to come up with other tax proposals. That will be sufficient.
All right, thank you so much, Voter Vessels, spokesperson for the Freedom Front Plus. BOSA leader Musima Imane, are you happy with what the minister has presented today?
Today was about status quo. It was about a budget where the minister could only move within a fixed lane. And I thought the minister did a good job in doing that. The difficulty we face in South Africa is that growth is suppressed, debt is high, and more than anything, the only people who must be more happy is the civil servants who are getting an above 5% increase. Other than that, most other sectors are getting marginal increases, which means for teachers, for nurses, for hospitals, for building of schools, all of that is going to be suppressed. So I think this is about status quo. We need to focus on growth, fund for growth, and ensure there are more jobs going into the economy.
All right, thank you so much, Musima Imane, the spokesperson for BOSA leader. I'm going to ask Dr. Mark-Burke. Dr. Mark-Burke, sir. Dr. Mark-Burke, the spokesperson of the DA, has been waiting here patiently. Dr. Burke, thank you so much for your time. As the DA, has the minister struck the right chords in this budget?
I think striking the right chords is a high bar, but he's presented to us a workable version of the budget that we should be able to support.
In terms of the budget shortfall, how should he maneuver?
Yeah, I think the idea of a shortfall in the budget is a bit of a misnomer. It's a narrative problem. We have an expenditure problem in South Africa, and we're excited to hear that the minister has now announced a spending review that will find inefficiencies in the budget, and as we identify those inefficiencies, add it back into the budget so that these provisional allocation can increase even further. We do need an aggressive focus on infrastructure investment. Some of that was announced now, and we are hopeful that as we find inefficiencies, we add that back into the budget. We can invest more in infrastructure, and we can invest more in critical frontline services.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Mark-Burke, spokesperson of the Democratic Alliance. For more reaction, I'm going to cross back to my colleague, Nompu.
All right, thanks very much for coming back to us. I've got the Finance Minister with me, Enoch Godongwana. Thanks very much, Minister, for joining us. So you've managed to table this budget, 2025, the third iteration thereof. Do you think you've done enough to balance the needs of delivering to South Africans as a whole, while at the same time ratings agencies and the market?
I think that's what I was saying. One of the things running through the speech is an element what we call about as the trade-offs, which we've managed to achieve. And many people forget that. If you say, let's cut 0, let's reverse 0.5, we are losing revenue. But you need, therefore, to have a trade-off and say, what am I going to lose on the expenditure side? And we've done a balancing act in that regard.
Minister, you said that this is an expansionary budget, not an austerity budget. You've had to cut your expectations in terms of revenue by about 60 billion rand over the medium term. Where are you going to be putting those additional resources, the 180 billion rand worth of resources over the medium term?
The good king, very few journalists captured what you have done. Let me just praise you for that. You've understood that I've increased by 180 billion rand over the medium term. What are those areas that have been? Education, which is a major problem. Health, which is I quoted deliberately a doctor who says what are the kind of challenges they are facing in hospitals. So health is a critical component of that. The infrastructure is a critical component of that. So all of those things are quite important. Basic services for our people.
Minister, one last thing. You've hit the pockets of motorists, but at the same time, you're going to expect less in terms of revenue. Just unpack that a little bit for us. Just in terms of the fact that you've had to hit the motorists a bit harder with the increase in the fuel levy, which you were hoping not to touch, and also the fact that you are going to be having less revenue. That means you're not satisfying all the objectives that you sought to satisfy.
Yeah, I'm saying I've increased the fuel tax. I made the point that for 3 consecutive years, I've not touched the fuel tax. 3 consecutive years. I'm doing it precisely because I've run out of, there are few options. And secondly, I say in the next financial year, 2026, I may have a whole of about 20 billion rand on the same budget that I'm putting across now. And I'm proposing to increase tax of about 20 billion rand next year. However, SARS is promising me a good amount, which may necessitate that I don't increase that tax next year.
Well, we'll be speaking to the SARS Commissioner shortly. Thank you so much, Minister, for your time. That was Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana speaking to us. We're going to hand it over now to one of my colleagues, to Bulela Philip, and we hand it over to him.
Well, thank you so much again. Now joining me is the UAT leader, Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi. I know the last time you posed to the budget proposals by the minister. This time around, are you happy with what is presented?
No, thank you so much. No, I think in Africa there's no change here. He was here to please the partners. When we came here, we had and those expectations were we want a budget that will address or not disappoint the poorest and the working class. Understanding also that the country is facing a dire socio-economic challenges that need a decisive intervention. So we needed a budget that is people-centered, not profit-centered. So what he did here is nothing new, because now we have a problem of fuel, which is now another problem. When you have a problem with increase in fuel, that means increase in food, that increase in transport. Then where does it go? It goes again to the poorest and the working class. So we needed a budget that is bold, that will also address the issue of unemployment. With over 8.2 million unemployed, at least there must have been a plan into how to mitigate such a challenge or such gap.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi. He is the leader of the UAT. For more reaction, I cross back to you, Nompo.
All right, it's very busy here at the Cape Town International Convention Centre with the hustle and bustle of parliamentarians speaking to media. But I am fortunate enough to speak with the SARS Commissioner, Edward Kiswita. Thanks very much, Mr. Kiswita, for joining us. So the Minister has set you a target of 1.986 trillion rand to raise for this fiscal year, 2025-2026. Is it doable?
Well, first of all, it's an estimate based on certain assumptions
And if those assumptions materialize, it is absolutely doable. I think, though, what is quite key is that we have engaged with the Minister and made a case that we can bolster even the 1.86 if we build on the lessons of the last year, which allowed us to ring-fence an allocation from the Minister to drive a focused debt recovery program. This is not money that is raised, that is collected by raising taxes. It is money that already belongs to the state. It requires no policy adjustment. It just requires SARS to do what it is mandated to do, which is to collect all revenues due. In the past, we could not do that because we didn't have enough resources. So last year, we hired about 600 additional people, 700 people, and some of the money, and drove a debt recovery program which demonstrated that we can return on the investment an amount of between 30 and 60 times money back. In other words, if the Minister gives us a rand, we can turn that into between 30 and 60 rand through this program. And so the Minister has therefore agreed this year to add another billion, and we have started. We've already employed 500 additional people on a project basis. On the 1st of June, we'll bring in 250 more, and we hope to build that up to about 1,700 employees who will focus only on debt collection. So we have said to the Minister, if this project succeeds, we will be able to provide an additional revenue of between 20 and 50 billion rand. That 20 to 50 billion rand is not yet in the 1986.
Over what time frame are we talking about?
We have already begun to focus the project, and over the next few months we'll prove the project, which will allow the Minister in October, when he delivers the MTF, to decide how much he wants to include in the projection for this year as well as the outer years. In the budget announcement today, the Minister says that in the back of his head he thinks the number could be about 35 billion.
Commissioner, I know you don't like us for this, but it's quick and fast. Thank you so much. That was the Commissioner, SARS Commissioner Edward Kisvita. Let's hand it over now to Bulelani.
Well, now joining me is Songezo Zibi, the leader of Rise Mzansi, also the chairperson of SCOPA. Firstly, should we be even using this venue when we have the dome, when we talk about lack of resources as a country?
No, the dome is being prepared so that it can withstand different weather conditions, firstly, and secondly, it had a big open space at the back that was being underutilized, so Parliament has to provide meeting rooms and other facilities so that we can use it more permanently until Parliament is but I agree with you, as soon as it's ready we need to go back there.
All right, the Minister's presentation today, are we on the right track? He talks about possible tax increases next year, where we're not just deferring the obvious.
The most important thing that Parliament has to do, and MPs have to take their work very seriously, is what the Parliament said about expenditure reviews. And I hope they were listening, because that work needs us to engage with Treasury, to engage with each and every department, to make sure that each minister commits to an actual number by which they are going to cut out the waste that he spoke about in government. South Africans have been very clear. They've said you are wasting and allowing money to be stolen. You need to fix that problem. If we work on that successfully, there will be less reason to increase taxes in the future. We take that work at SCOPA very seriously. In that journey, and South Africans will be able to see for themselves in which areas we can begin to spend better.
Lastly, how do we address the challenge of the budget shortfall?
Look, there are two things. We have to invest in the economy. We are not investing enough in the economy. About 80% of the money that SARS collects goes to SARS, goes to social grants, and it goes to paying interest on debt. It's what he was referring to when he was talking about the composition of expenditure. We need to take some tough decisions about what we spend the money we collect on. It won't help for political parties to want to be popular with everybody. One of the things that we spoke to the finance minister about, and he addressed it today in our consultations, is that we need to repurpose the SRD grant so that it helps people in the process of finding work. It begins to fund job-creating programs in small towns, in rural areas, in regional economies and so on. It's a tough decision because parliamentarians here don't want to say, let's use this money in different ways. They come in here on TV and talk to you and say, don't increase taxes, but spend more. Those are not serious people. And South Africans should stop taking them seriously because they have zero solutions.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Songezo Zebi, the leader of Rise Mzansi. For more reaction, we cross back to my colleague Samkele.
The Department of Public Works and Infrastructure is going to play a critical role in stimulating the South African economy and making it to grow and creating jobs. The Deputy Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure is going to play a critical role, particularly with those funds allocated to building of public infrastructure. Mr. Zikalala, Deputy Minister, just the essence of the department playing a critical role in economic growth within the country on infrastructure development. How do you see that panning out within the current medium term?
Well, both as the ANC and on behalf of the department, we believe that the budget create more flexibility to ensure that we grow the economy, especially infrastructure investment. It comes at a time where we are convening the South African Infrastructure Development Symposium, which is the fourth time this year, where we will present the second infrastructure booklet that tell us of projects that are going to be implemented. The minister, which is important, allocated more than 1 trillion to infrastructure, but he also further said the regulations of P will be enhanced, a work that is already happening. He also spoke of unsolicited bids, where you find that people would want to do the things on their own in relation to infrastructure, but they would not be able to proceed because of procurement regulations. We believe that building on this budget, we are going to see the stimulation of economic growth through both infrastructure but also industrialization, as we dwell on Operation Vula that seek to ensure that we unlock logistics, we enhance the performance of our ports. What we also appreciate is to ensure the investment in social services, the employment of teachers, nurses, police, and others.
Mr. Zikalala, particularly on the Operation Vulindlela, you're looking at your alliance partners, COSATU and the SACP, that have essentially said that that is the privatization of particular entities within the country, and in particular the rail network.
There is not even a single entity that we have given out completely, where we invite the private sector, we invite them at a minimum level, we invite them at a particular point where we will say your participation is for this duration. And this is what is happening in the development finance in the world. In all countries that are developed, that has been through the public and private partnership.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zikalala, who is also an ANC member and the Deputy Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure within the country. My colleague Bulelani Phillips is with the Congress of South African Trade Unions, Matthew Parks, whom has a particular interest when it comes to this triple piece of public-private partnerships, and in particular opening up the rail network to private players within the country under Operation Vulindlela.
Welcome again. We now take reactions from the Labour Federation, COSATU. National spokesperson is Matthew Parks, and now joins me. The minister says this is not an austerity budget. Do you agree with him?
It's a mixed bag. There's some things which we campaigned for, which are quite good. The minister scrapping the VAT hike, which would have hurt workers.
the double inflation increase for social grants, expanding public employment programs to help young people enter the labour market, significant investments in infrastructure which can help grow the economy, create jobs from electricity to roads, from water to ports. Those are good things. There's some rebuilding of frontline public services which have really been weakened by budget cuts over the years, especially education, health and so forth. There's a hiring of additional critical staff like 4,000 police officers, about 6,500 teachers, 800 doctors. It's not enough, we would have wanted more, but it's not as bad as we feared given the VAT scrapping, the reduction in economic growth. But there's some parts which are disappointing. No adjustment for SOD grant, just even for inflation. That really is shameful. There's no real interventions around local government. And yet municipalities are on a free fall in many areas. It's overall there's some good things, but also where we spend the money. You can allocate money for infrastructure, but will municipalities spend it?
But the question really, debate that has been going on is that historically we've seen the forecasting of economic growth not really reaching the announcements that have been made by the minister. The minister again coming to say they expect a 1.9% increase, but do you think that that's achievable?
It's got to be achievable. I know it sounds like a broken record because we've been having this discussion for 15 years, and that's why we're in a crisis. We're not in a crisis because of revenue, we're in a crisis because of growth. If we've seen a 1% growth for 15 years, we're not going to reduce unemployment. So we've got to remove the obstacles to growing the economy, making sure we have reliable but also affordable electricity, making sure transport is working so our mining and manufacturing, agricultural goods get to the markets. We've got to make sure the mining rights application system is finally live so we can attract investments to the mining sector. We've got to get Metro Rail working because that transports 10 million commuters in our cities to work on time. More difficult things is local government. If you have municipalities collapsing, not just in Ditsobotlo or Machabeng, but in Joburg and eThekwini, then it has an impact upon the economy. We've got to fix leakages in the state because there's no point in increasing taxes if municipalities return money unspent at the end of the year. But I think what also gives us a bit of hope is the South African Revenue Service. The staff there have done an excellent job. SARS has shown a model to rebuilding the state. Hire additional staff, invest in infrastructure, remove corrupt elements, and SARS is exceeding tax collection. So if we give SARS more support, it means we can collect the taxes owed to the state to rebuild the public services.
All right, thank you so much. Matthew Parks is the spokesperson of Labour Federation, COSATU. For more reaction, it's back to you, Samgele.
The SACP is one of those political parties that were complaining that they are not consulted enough when it comes to the crafting of the budget speech. They may not be particularly happy with the increase in the fuel levy. Central Committee member Dr. Alex Mashilo, just in particular your response to the budget that has been presented by the minister, particularly knowing the trillions of rands that have been appointed to infrastructure development within the country, Triple P's public-private partnerships that are going to be played in order to grow the economy.
Firstly, the consumers are going to pay for the fuel increase, fuel levy increase. This is how it works. When you increase the amount of money that people pay per litre of petrol or diesel, the taxi owners, those who operate buses, are going to transfer that increase to the consumers. You must be sure that in the coming months, we will see increases in transport fares across the country. That is not going to reduce the cost of living for the poor particularly. It is going to increase the cost of living for the poor. And it goes against what the minister was saying when he highlighted the importance of affordable, accessible, and safe public transport. South Africa does not have a widespread public transport system. We rely on the system that takes more money from workers. If you think about Statistics South Africa, census of 2022, the family size in South Africa is more than 3. Now, the amount of money spent in commuting between work and home is just going to take more money from the families that are struggling to make ends meet. We call this social reproduction in the SACP. We have that crisis of social reproduction. But let us deal with the characterization of the budget by the minister. He says that this is not an austerity budget. We are, however, reducing additional budget spending. That is on the one hand. while on the other hand he is asserting that this is an expansionary budget. Now, if you reduce additional spending, you are cutting growth in budget spending. Now, you are cutting growth in the expansion of the budget. You cannot cut growth in the expansion of the budget on the one hand, and then argue on the other hand that this is an expansionary budget, because the two contradict each other. There is a problem there. It needs more emphasis just on the infrastructure. If you look on South African budgets for the past 10 years or so, they would have told you that we will be spending 100 billion annually on infrastructure, so and so. Travel the country, look at the state of roads, look at the state of water infrastructure, look at the state of electricity infrastructure, look at the state of all major infrastructures. It is as if that money had not been spent, which can be the case in real terms. The question now is whether the 1 trillion rand that is pledged on infrastructure will definitely come forward and go into infrastructure spending, so that we begin to see changes in rural areas where people want water infrastructure because they want water supply to overcome the crisis that the Statistics South Africa has highlighted in its census.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Alex Mashilo, as member of the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party, from us here in Cape Town for this third attempt of a budget by the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana. It seems to have consensus amongst the Government of National Unity political formations. The issue being sticky for them is the increase of the fuel levy for some of them, and also the removal of the zero-rated basket for some poor South Africans. It will have a ripple effect, the fuel levy, on poor South Africans, as said by the SACP and other political formations. From myself, Samkele Masego, my colleague Masego, my colleague Nompu Saziba, and my other colleague, it is a wrap here in the city of Cape Town for this third attempt of a budget that is seemingly looking like it will be passed.